Fewer than one-third of data center operators bothered to reply to a state survey inquiring about how much water they are consuming. The courts are clearing their desks, and local governments are forming committees to investigate things they approved 3 years ago. It is Friday, June 26, 2026. Welcome to the Daily Share. I am your host, Lambert Willingham. We begin in Texas, where administrative paperwork continues to outlive the people who filed it. The Texas Department of Transportation is shutting down the northbound main lanes of Interstate 35 in South Austin for the next 3 weekends. Crews will begin preparing the corridor between Slaughter Lane and William Cannon Drive for the addition of elevated lanes as part of the Capital Express South project. Commuters will spend their Friday nights navigating a labyrinth of detours and frontage road bottlenecks. The overnight closures will stretch across the southern corridor, providing the physical boundaries for a delay you already knew was coming. The Texas State Board of Education is barreling toward a final vote on its rewritten public school curriculum. The proposed instructional materials significantly trim world history in favour of a state-centric and heavily religious perspective. Conservative proponents praise the shift back to what they describe as foundational values, but the framework has drawn intense scrutiny for injecting Christian doctrine into social studies and reading lists while systematically de-emphasizing diverse cultural viewpoints. Several rabbis and Jewish advocacy groups have formally condemned the framework ahead of the final adoption, pointing out that the heavy-handed Judeo-Christian branding functionally erases Judaism in favour of a purely Christian historical narrative. The board is proceeding anyway, having concluded that history is much easier to teach if you simply remove the parts where other people existed. State lawmakers convened a House Natural Resources Committee hearing this week to investigate the staggering water consumption of data centers, only to openly acknowledge that the technology industry is largely ignoring them. The State Public Utility Commission recently sent surveys to operators to gauge the resource strain caused by massive server cooling systems, but fewer than a third of the companies returned the paperwork. The lack of transparency leaves the state flying blind as it attempts to manage an already fragile water grid against the backdrop of relentless artificial intelligence infrastructure expansion. Legislators are now previewing potential regulatory bills for the upcoming legislative session, suggesting that asking politely will soon be replaced with mandatory reporting. The state is discovering that voluntary disclosure works perfectly for companies that have nothing to hide and works even better for those that do. Nearly a year after the catastrophic Independence Day flash floods killed more than 130 people across central Texas, local media and public officials are still attempting to piece together how the disaster response failed so completely. Retrospective reports and investigative podcasts are surfacing chaotic 911 dispatch records, highlighting the systemic communication breakdowns that left residents stranded without warning. The immediate debris has been cleared, but survivors and the families of victims continue to demand accountability from Travis County and state emergency management agencies. The institutional reckoning has moved past the initial wave of grief and into a protracted legal and political search for answers. We have reached the phase of tragedy where the timeline is dictated entirely by the discovery process. The Austin housing market is showing minor signs of life, with a recent report tracking a modest boost in new home sales and slightly faster closing times throughout May. The uptick provides a brief moment of relief for developers who have spent the last year navigating a mostly frozen local real estate environment. Simultaneously, the city rolled out a fresh batch of affordable housing incentives targeting mixed-use construction and downtown towers. The administrative programs are an attempt to keep affordable units trickling into the pipeline. The local government is proving it is still willing to trade developer density for a fraction of housing equity, provided the developer is the one who actually has to build it. We turn to the broader economy, where Wall Street is currently discovering that the future costs more than previously advertised. The preferred inflation gauge of the Federal Reserve has blown past target levels, with the Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index surging 4.1% over the past year. Core services inflation, which strips out volatile food and energy costs, jumped even higher. This cements the reality that underlying price pressures have deeply embedded themselves across the broader economy. Falling energy prices from the stabilizing Middle East conflict offer some headline relief, but the stubbornness of service sector inflation effectively leaves a prolonged regime of elevated interest rates on the table. Independent analyst Wolf Richter saw this coming in his data, noting the structural stickiness of services. We are returning to an era where the cost of borrowing money actually reflects the risk of lending it, a concept the market treats as a profound historical injustice. Newly installed Federal Reserve Chairman Kevin Warsh is aggressively signalling a hawkish pivot. He is using tough rhetoric on structural inflation to reassure nervous bond markets, definitively rejecting the patience of the previous administration. Warsh has made it clear the central bank will maintain tight monetary policy until the underlying math actually matches its mandate. To execute the shift, he tapped veteran Fed economists Daniel Kovitz and Eric Engstrom as senior advisors. The personnel moves are designed to build an analytical fortress around his inflation-fighting agenda. When a central banker actually wants to change direction, they start by replacing the people who run the models. Following up on a maritime logistics story we reported recently, the fragile resumption of shipping traffic through the Strait of Hormuz collapsed on Thursday. Iran fired upon a commercial cargo vessel, prompting the United Nations to immediately suspend its maritime evacuation initiative. This targeted strike abruptly ended a brief window of stability that had sent global crude prices tumbling back toward pre-war levels earlier in the week. Oil markets reacted to the suspended evacuation with expected whiplash as tanker rates spiked and supply chains braced for another prolonged blockade. Diplomatic waivers and temporary ceasefires are proving to be nothing more than administrative pauses in a region where leverage is measured strictly in barrels per day. The relentless market euphoria surrounding artificial intelligence has officially hit a wall. Wall Street is suffering its second losing week in the last 3 months, dragged down by a sharp sell-off in memory and chip-making stocks across Asia that cascaded into the United States markets. Investors are being forced to brutally reprice the infrastructure companies that have carried the indices all year. Adding to the sudden sobriety of the sector, OpenAI has reportedly pushed its highly anticipated public offering back to next year. The delay suggests the premier players in the industry are opting to wait out the current wave of market volatility. The smartest algorithmic models in the world have apparently advised their creators not to test an environment where retail enthusiasm is rapidly evaporating. Apple has quietly increased the prices of its MacBooks and iPads by more than $200. The company attributes the steep markup to the soaring cost and constrained supply of memory chips. While the iPhone has been temporarily spared from the pricing adjustment, analysts expect the hardware tax to eventually bleed across the entire product ecosystem by the end of the year. The hike reflects the unavoidable downstream consequences of the artificial intelligence boom, which has monopolized the global supply of high-bandwidth memory and storage silicon. Consumers are now effectively subsidizing the arms race of the technology sector every time they purchase consumer-grade hardware. It is an innovative business model, forcing the public to quietly finance the very servers that will eventually automate their jobs. Moving to the wider world, where the legal system continues to operate as a highly effective filter for institutional accountability. To update our previous coverage of the seismic disasters in South America, the confirmed death toll from the back-to-back earthquakes in northern Venezuela has surged past 500, with thousands more injured. Countless individuals remain unaccounted for in the rubble. Local hospitals are collapsing under the sudden influx of trauma patients, forcing medical workers into desperate triage scenarios on the streets outside compromised facilities. International rescue teams and foreign aid have begun arriving in the battered region to assist with the overwhelming logistics of recovery. Emergency satellite internet terminals are being rapidly deployed to help coordinate the fractured disaster response. The international community is providing exactly what is needed, arriving just as soon as the worst of the damage is finished happening. The United States Supreme Court has cleared the way for the administration to strip deportation protections from thousands of Haitians and Syrians. The ruling effectively revives a hardline immigration agenda that forces asylum seekers back to countries experiencing systemic violence and active humanitarian crises. By removing the legal roadblocks, the Conservative majority granted the executive branch sweeping deference over the mechanics of the border and the termination of protected status. The decision places vulnerable populations in legal limbo. Humanitarian safe harbour is being traded for rigid administrative enforcement, proving that compassion is entirely a matter of jurisdiction. In a second ruling, the Supreme Court handed a massive corporate victory to Bayer by scaling back thousands of pending lawsuits alleging that its Roundup weed killer causes cancer. The decision effectively blocks a wave of state-level litigation that threatened to financially devastate the agricultural giant. It reinforces federal preemption over state failure to warn claims, a highly technical legal shield that routinely protects chemical manufacturers from local juries. Bayer stock absorbed the news with immediate relief. The highest court in the land remains the ultimate hedge against product liability, provided your legal team costs more than the damages you inflicted. A perfect storm of high interest rates and a chronic shortage of inventory has driven the Western housing market into an acute affordability crisis. Across major global metros, rising rents and home prices are radically outpacing wage growth. This dynamic is locking an entire generation out of ownership and forcing a volatile public debate over whether housing should be treated as a basic right or a protected investment asset. Economists warn that the ongoing deficit of buildable land and the paralysis of the mortgage market are calcifying into permanent structural problems. As developers pull back and institutional capital retreats, governments are left scrambling for policy interventions that do everything except produce actual places to live. The United States men's national team was officially eliminated from the World Cup after suffering a brutal 3-2 defeat to Turkey in a dead rubber match in Los Angeles. A devastating last-gasp winner sent the American squad packing in front of a domestic crowd, ending a deeply frustrating tournament run defined by tactical errors and missed opportunities. Despite the early exit of the host nation, the tournament itself has already cemented its financial and historical success. FIFA officials confirmed that the event has shattered the all-time attendance record set in 1994. Global football enthusiasm remains highly profitable, completely insulated from how poorly the home team manages to perform on the grass. If there is a unifying theme to the day's ledgers, it is the quiet triumph of the administrative shield over the physical reality of the people caught beneath it. From the Supreme Court insulating chemical manufacturers from local juries, to the Texas Board of Education deciding which parts of history are convenient enough to teach, to the data centers simply ignoring inquiries about the water they consume, the lesson is clear. Institutions have realized that the easiest way to solve a structural crisis is to declare they no longer have jurisdiction over the consequences. It is a highly efficient model of governance, provided you are the one writing the memos and not the one drinking the water. That is all the damage for today. You are welcome to return on Monday, assuming you can afford the newly adjusted price of the silicon required to hear me. I am Lambert Woollingham, signing off with the gentle reminder that if you cannot find accountability anywhere in the system, you should probably check the nearest unreturned public utility survey. Until tomorrow,